Contend sometimes the smallest kindness hides the biggest plan. Sometimes a joke turns into destiny before you realize you're laughing. And sometimes the person who saves your life does it quietly, knowing they won't be around to see what grows afterward. My neighbor set me up on what I thought was a joke date, and I almost walked out the second I realized what was happening. Mrs. Chen, the 76-year-old woman next door who'd been leaving dumplings at my door for months, cornered me 3 days earlier with that look in her eyes. The one that said she was about to meddle in my life whether I liked it or not. "Zane," she'd said, gripping my arm with surprising strength for someone so small and frail. "I need you to meet someone, a woman. She needs furniture work, but she's difficult, older. Probably won't even hire you. Do it as a favor to me." I should have known it was a setup. I should have seen through the thin excuse, the way she avoided my eyes like she was hiding something. But Mrs. Chen had this way of making you feel like you owed her something, just for existing. Like the world itself had personally assigned you to her care, and so I agreed. What I didn't know was that this neighbor who set me up wasn't just playing matchmaker. She was dying, and this was her last gift to me. What I didn't know was that the woman walking through that coffee shop door would look at me like she could see straight through to the wound. I'd been hiding for 3 years. What I didn't know was that my whole life was about to change in ways that would terrify me, heal me, and force me to choose between the safety of my grief and the risk of living again. The joke date wasn't supposed to matter. It was supposed to be an hour of awkward small talk, a polite excuse to leave, and then back to my cabin, my dog Harley, and the quiet life I'd built like a fortress around my broken heart. I'd perfected that life. Solitude had rules. Silence was predictable. Pain stayed locked where it belonged. But when Elise walked in 20 minutes late, frazzled, breathless, eyes rimmed red with exhaustion, offering an apology that cut straight through me, everything I thought I knew about protecting myself started to crack. She spotted me at the small wooden table in Lakeview Coffee and hesitated, like she was already bracing for disappointment. Afternoon sunlight poured through the windows, catching loose strands of brown hair that had escaped her messy bun, turning them into thin ribbons of gold. She wore scrubs under a long cardigan, like she'd come straight from work and hadn't had the energy to pretend otherwise. There was something about the way she sat down across from me, shoulders slightly hunched, hands wrapped around a coffee cup she hadn't even tasted, that made me forget I was supposed to be angry at Mrs. Chen for tricking me. "I'm sorry," she said, and her voice wasn't nervous so much as tired, bone-deep tired. "I didn't mean to be late," I nodded, unsure what to say, still half ready to stand up and walk out. Then she looked me straight in the eye and skipped every safe topic people usually hide behind. "I just watched a patient die holding his wife's hand," she said quietly. 60 years of marriage, and now I'm here pretending I know how to do this. I'm sorry. I'm a hospice nurse, and I'm not very good at pretending to be normal anymore. Something inside my chest tightened, sharp and sudden. I should have shut it down. I should have deflected with a joke, or changed the subject, or used Mrs. Chen's fake furniture story as an excuse. Instead, something in Elisa's honesty cracked open a door I'd been holding shut for 3 years. "I'm sorry," I said, and my voice came out rougher than I meant. "About your patient." Elise blinked like she was surprised. I'd met her where she stood instead of backing away. "Thank you," she whispered. "It never gets easier, watching people say goodbye. I don't know what made me do it. Maybe it was the way she didn't flinch from sadness. Maybe it was the fact that she smelled faintly of lavender soap and hospital antiseptic, like life and death existing in the same space. "My fiancé died," I said, the words slipping out before I could stop them. 3 years ago. Car accident. On our wedding day." Elisa's hands tightened around her coffee cup, and her eyes widened, not with pity, but with recognition, like she knew exactly what it meant to carry that kind of weight every day. "Oh, God," she breathed. "Zane, I'm so sorry." The way she said my name, like it mattered, like I mattered, made my throat close. No one said my name like that anymore. Most people avoided talking about Sarah altogether. Like pretending she'd never existed would make my grief easier for them to handle. Elise didn't look away. She leaned forward slightly, elbows resting on the table, her voice gentle but steady. "I'm divorced," she said. 15 years of marriage, and he left me for someone younger. Said I was too serious, too sad, always around death. He made me feel like loving me was exhausting. Her voice cracked on the last word, and she blinked hard, fighting tears she clearly didn't want to shed in front of a stranger. So here we are, she added after a moment, forcing a small, crooked smile. Two people who probably shouldn't be on a date, set up by a neighbor who apparently thinks we need saving. A short laugh escaped me before I could stop it. It surprised us both. Mrs. Chen's got a hell of a sense of humor, I said. Elise's smile widened just enough to matter. She told me you were stubborn and quiet, she admitted. That you needed someone who wouldn't let you hide. My heart stumbled at that. She said that? Elise nodded. She said a lot of things. She made me promise I'd show up, even though I told her I wasn't ready. She said you'd understand what it's like to feel broken. The air between us grew heavier, charged with something I wasn't ready to name. Outside the window, people walked by laughing, walking dogs, carrying groceries, living normal lives that felt impossibly far away. Inside that coffee shop, it was just me and Elise and the truth neither of us had planned to tell. I don't know if I'm broken, I said slowly, or if I'm just stuck. Elise nodded like she understood perfectly. I think stuck and broken feel the same most days. We sat there in silence, neither of us drinking our coffee, neither of us looking away. Then she did something I didn't expect. Elise reached across the table and placed her hand on mine. Her fingers were warm, slightly rough from work, and the touch sent a jolt through me that I felt all the way down to my chest. Thank you for being honest, she said softly. Most people lie on first dates. I looked down at her hand resting on mine and realized I hadn't let anyone touch me like this in 3 years, not in a way that meant something. This doesn't feel like a first date, I admitted. It feels like something else. Elise slowly pulled her hand back, like she didn't really want to, and wrapped both hands around her cup again. Mrs. Chen knew what she was doing, she said quietly. She told me you'd see me, not just the tired nurse who smells like hospitals. I swallowed hard. She told me you needed furniture work, I said. Elise laughed, a soft, genuine sound that loosened something tight inside my chest. I don't, she admitted. I'm her hospice nurse. I've been taking care of her for 3 months. The world tilted beneath me. You're Mrs. Chen's nurse? I asked. Elise nodded, her smile fading into something sad. She has stage 4 pancreatic cancer, she said gently. 4 to 6 months, maybe less. She didn't want you to know yet. But she made me promise I'd meet you. My hands went cold. Mrs. Chen was dying. The woman who brought me dumplings, who scolded me for working too late, who reminded me so much of my grandmother was dying. And she'd spent her last months trying to set me up with her nurse. She's dying, I repeated, the words tasting wrong in my mouth. Elise's eyes filled with tears. She loves you, she said. She talks about you all the time. She says you're wasting your life hiding, and she can't stand the thought of leaving you alone. I pushed my chair back and stood, so fast it scraped against the floor. My chest felt tight, my hands shaking. I need air. Elise stood too, grabbing her bag. Zane, wait! But I was already heading for the door, my heart pounding as I stepped into the cool afternoon air, the smell of lake water and pine filling my lungs. I couldn't tell if I was angry or terrified or something else entirely. Elise followed me outside, her footsteps quick behind me. Zane, please. I stopped on the sidewalk, staring out at the calm, indifferent lake. She's dying, I said again, like saying it enough times would make it real. And she used her last months to play matchmaker. She used her last months, Elise said softly, stepping beside me, to give you a chance at living again. I turned to look at her, at this woman I'd just met who somehow felt like she understood me better than anyone had in years. What if I don't want to live again? I asked, my voice cracking. What if staying stuck is easier? Elise reached out and touched my arm, her hand warm through my flannel. Then you stay stuck, she said quietly. And I stay exhausted and convinced I'm too much for anyone to love. And Mrs. Chen dies knowing she tried and couldn't save either of us. Her words hit hard, knocking the air from my lungs. I looked at her and saw the same fear I lived with every day. The fear of trying again, of losing again, of hoping for something better. Underneath it all was something small and stubborn. hope. I don't know how to do this, I admitted. Elise squeezed my arm. Neither do I. We stood there as the sun slid lower, two broken people shoved together by a dying woman's last wish. And for the first time in 3 years, I felt something other than numb. I felt terrified, and that felt like the beginning of something real. I stopped walking toward my truck. I didn't go home. Not yet. Elise and I turned together toward the lake trail as the light softened. And without saying it out loud, we both knew we weren't done with this moment yet. They walked the lake trail as evening settled in, the path crunching softly beneath their shoes. Neither of them quite ready to speak again after everything that had been said. The water lay stretched out beside them, darkening by the minute, ripples catching the last light like broken glass. Zane kept his hands shoved deep in his pockets, his shoulders tight, his mind replaying Mrs. Chen's voice, Elise's words, the feel of her hand on his arm. He told himself he could still leave, still retreat back into the quiet safety of his cabin. Harley's steady presence, the predictable ache of loneliness he knew how to manage. But his feet kept moving beside Elise's, matching her pace without thinking. That scared him more than anything else. They didn't talk much at first. There was something almost sacred about the silence, like breaking it too soon would shatter whatever fragile thing had begun to form between them. Zane noticed the way Elise walked, careful but tired, like someone who spent all day on her feet carrying more weight than most. People ever saw? Her breath came out in faint white puffs as the temperature dropped. And without thinking, he slowed slightly so she wouldn't have to rush. The sky shifted from gold to bruised purple, mountains darkening into silhouettes, and the first stars began to prick through the fading light. It was strange how peaceful it felt, walking beside a woman he'd met barely an hour ago, after years of keeping the world at arm's length. Harley would love this, Zane said suddenly, the words slipping out before he could stop them. Elise glanced at him, curious. Harley? My dog, he said, a small smile tugging at his mouth. Big mutt. Thinks he's a wolf. Hates being left behind. Elise's expression softened. I like dogs that think they're bigger than they are. He's definitely bigger. In his own mind, Zane said, and then surprised himself by adding, I usually bring him out here early in the morning when it's quiet. He stopped short, realizing what he'd just done. He'd shared something small but personal, a piece of his routine, a glimpse into a life he rarely invited anyone into. Elise didn't tease him for it. She just nodded. That sounds nice. They reached a weathered bench, overlooking the water, and sat down, the wood cold beneath them. Elise pulled her cardigan tighter around herself, and Zane noticed without thinking, shifting closer so his shoulder brushed hers. The contact sent a faint electric awareness through him, not overwhelming, just present, like a reminder that he was alive. I go see Mrs. Chen 3 times a week, Elise said quietly after a while. Sometimes more if she's having a bad day. And every single time she asks me about you. If I've met you yet, if I've given you a chance. Zane stared out at the lake, his chest aching in a way that felt both heavy and tender. Why didn't you tell me before? He asked. Why come to that coffee shop knowing what this really was? Elise turned toward him, her eyes glassy in the dim light. Because she begged me to, she said. She said you'd run if you knew she was sick. She wanted us to meet as just 2 people first, not as her nurse and her neighbor. Just Zane and Elise. He swallowed, his throat tight. She's right, he admitted. If I'd known, I wouldn't have come. Elise nodded slowly. I know, that's why I agreed to lie. But sitting across from you, hearing about your fiancé, I couldn't keep pretending. You deserved the truth. Zane reached over and took her hand without thinking, his fingers threading through hers like it was the most natural thing in the world. Her hand was cold from the evening air, and he rubbed his thumb across her knuckles, trying to warm her. What else did she tell you about me? He asked softly. Elise smiled, sad and fond all at once. She said you're the kindest man she's ever known, that you fixed her porch railing without being asked, that you shovel her walkway every time it snows, that you sit with her and don't make her feel like a burden. She said you have a good heart, but it's locked up, so tight she's afraid you'll die with it still closed. The words hit deep, and Zane had to look away, blinking hard. I don't know how to unlock it, he whispered. I don't know how to stop being afraid. Elise squeezed his hand. "Maybe you don't have to stop being afraid," she said. "Maybe you just have to try anyway." They stayed there until the cold crept into their bones, and the stars multiplied overhead. When they finally stood and walked back toward the parking lot, Zane felt a strange reluctance, like the night was ending too soon. He walked Elise to her car, the lot quiet, shadows stretching long beneath the streetlights. "Can I see you again?" he asked, his voice raw. "Not because Mrs. Chen wants us to. Because I do." Elise looked up at him. Exhaustion and hope tangled together in her eyes and nodded. "Yes," she said. Then her expression sobered. "But you need to know something. Mrs. Chen's condition is going to get worse. When it does, I'll be there with her until the end. If we try this, you're going to see death up close again. You're going to smell hospitals on my clothes. You're going to see it in my eyes some days. Can you handle that?" Zane thought of Sarah, of the crash, of 3 years spent running from anything that reminded him of loss. Then he thought of Elise, of the way she'd looked at him in that coffee shop, unflinching. "I don't know," he said honestly, "but I want to try." Elise reached up and cupped his cheek, her palm warm against his skin. "Then we'll try together." She kissed him, soft and brief, more promise than passion, but it left him dizzy all the same. When she drove away, her taillights disappearing into the dark, Zane stood there longer than necessary, his heart pounding, feeling something stronger than fear for the first time in years. He felt alive. 2 weeks later, he sat in Mrs. Chen's living room, the air heavy with the scent of herbal tea and something medicinal beneath it. Elise had invited him over, said Mrs. Chen wanted to see him. He'd spent hours carving a small wooden jewelry box, etching cherry blossoms into the lid. Because she'd once told him they reminded her of her husband. When he walked in, Mrs. Chen sat wrapped in blankets, her frame smaller than he remembered, her skin pale and drawn. His stomach dropped at the sight. But when she saw him, her eyes lit up. "Zane," she said sharply, "you came, and you brought my nurse with you. Just like I planned." Elise stood beside him, her hand slipping into his automatically. Mrs. Chen's gaze dropped to their joined hands, and she smiled. "Good," she said. "Very good. You tricked us," Zane said, trying to sound angry, failing miserably. "You lied to both of us." "I did," Mrs. Chen replied without shame. "And I'd do it again. You were both dying in different ways. I couldn't leave this world without trying to save you." Elise wiped at her eyes. "You should have told us." "If I told you, you'd say no," Mrs. Chen said simply. "Love doesn't wait for permission." She leaned forward with effort. "Zane, when my husband died, I wanted to die too. I stopped eating, stopped caring. Then I moved here. I met you. Watching you hide from your life broke my heart. So I decided my last act would be giving you a reason to live. Again." Zane couldn't speak, tears sliding down his face. Mrs. Chen turned to Elise. "And you," she said gently. "You've spent so long caring for the dying, you forgot you're allowed to live. Allowed to be loved." She pulled 2 envelopes from her robe. "For later," she said. "After I'm gone. Promise. Me something. Promise you'll take care of each other." Zane and Elise looked at one another, fear and hope mirrored between them. "We promise," Elise whispered. Mrs. Chen died 3 weeks later, Elise holding one hand, Zane the other. And when they opened the letters afterward, both read the same shaky words. "Love is worth the risk, always." That was 2 years ago. Elise moved into the cabin 6 months later. Harley adored her. They married beneath pine trees, cherry blossoms in her hair. And sometimes, waking beside her, Zane still couldn't believe. A joke date arranged by a dying neighbor had given him his life back. Life didn't transform overnight after Mrs. Chen's funeral. There was no sudden montage of happiness, no clean line separating grief from healing. What happened instead was quieter, slower, and far more terrifying. Elise and I learned how to exist together in the space Mrs. Chen had carved out for us, a space full of sharp edges and unexpected warmth. In the weeks after her death, the cabin felt different to me, like the walls were listening, like they knew I was no longer alone in my grief. Elise came over often at first. Sometimes after long shifts, still wearing scrubs, still smelling faintly of antiseptic and lavender. She never apologized for being tired. She never pretended she was okay when she wasn't. Some nights we talked for hours, sitting at the small kitchen table while Harley slept at our feet, his tail thumping every time Elise shifted. Other nights we said very little, existing side by side in a silence that felt earned instead of empty. I realized how much I'd missed that. Silence that didn't feel like punishment. Elise would tell me stories about her patients, not the dramatic moments people expected, but the small human ones. A man who asked for pancakes at 3 in the morning because his mother used to make them. A woman who wanted her nails painted bright red because she'd never been brave enough to do it in life. She talked about death the way other people talked about weather. Honestly, without spectacle. It scared me at first. Every story brushed against memories I'd spent years avoiding. But she never pushed me to respond. She let me sit with it, let me choose when to open my mouth. And when I finally told her about Sarah, really told her about the way her dress had been, hanging in the back of the truck the morning of the accident, about the sound of metal and glass and the unbearable quiet afterward, Elise didn't try to fix it. She just held my hand steady and warm and let me fall apart without looking away. That was the moment I knew I was in trouble. Because loving Elise meant accepting that grief wasn't something you escaped. It was something you learned to carry differently. 6 months after Mrs. Chen passed, Elise moved into the cabin. It wasn't a grand decision. It happened the way most real things do, one small step at a time. A toothbrush left behind, an extra sweater draped over a chair, her shoes by the door. Harley decided long before I did, planting himself beside her on the couch like he'd been waiting for her all along. The first night she officially stayed, Elise lay awake beside me, staring at the ceiling. "If this gets to be too much," she whispered, "you can tell me." "I won't be angry." I turned toward her, the moonlight catching the lines of exhaustion around her eyes. "If you leave," I said honestly, "I don't think it will be because it was too much. It'll be because you were brave." "Enough to try," she smiled sadly and kissed my shoulder. And we slept tangled together like we were afraid the morning might undo us. Loving Elise didn't erase my fear. It sharpened it. Every time she left for work, I felt a familiar tightness in my chest. Hospitals had taken enough from me already. I hated the days when she came home quiet, her eyes distant, carrying someone else's last moments inside her. But she let me in. She told me when a patient reminded her of me, when a goodbye had been especially hard, when she needed space and when she needed my arms around her. And slowly, without noticing exactly when it happened, I stopped seeing her work as a threat and started seeing it as proof of who she was. Someone who showed up even when it hurt. Especially when it hurt. The day I realized I loved her wasn't dramatic. We were standing in the kitchen, arguing about whether the porch railing needed replacing or could last. Another winter. She rolled her eyes at me, laughed, and said, "You're impossible." And something in my chest shifted, warm and steady. I loved her. Not despite the grief we carried, but because of the way we carried it together. We married the following spring beneath the pine trees near the lake. There were no grand arches, no elaborate decorations, just string lights, folding chairs, and cherry blossoms Elise had woven into her hair as a quiet tribute to Mrs. Chen. When Elise walked toward me, I thought of every version of myself that had believed this life was no longer possible. I thought of the man I'd been 3 years earlier, hiding in a cabin, convinced that surviving meant staying numb. I wished I could reach back through time and tell him he was wrong. That loving again wouldn't erase the past, but it would make the future worth facing. As we said our vows, I saw tears in Elise's eyes, not just for us, but for all the endings she carried with her, all the people who would never get this moment. I held her hands tighter and promised her I wasn't going anywhere. Not when things got heavy. Not when grief knocked at the door. Not when fear whispered that we should stop trying. And when she promised the same, I believed her. Even now, 2 years later. There are mornings I wake up beside her and feel that old disbelief settle in. The quiet cabin, the woman breathing softly beside me, Harley snoring at our feet. Some nights I dream of Sarah, and I wake with my heart racing, guilt and love tangled together. Elise never makes me feel wrong for that. She just pulls me close and reminds me that loving her doesn't mean I loved Sarah any less. It means I survived. Mrs. Chen was right. Love doesn't wait for permission. It doesn't ask if you're ready. It shows up anyway, disguised as a joke date. A meddling neighbor, a tired nurse who smells like hospitals and hope. And every day, I wake up grateful she didn't give me a choice. By the time 2 years had passed, the story of how Elise and I met had taken on a life of its own. Friends like to call it fate. Strangers called it coincidence. I called it Mrs. Chen, refusing to let two stubborn, grieving people waste whatever time they had left hiding from the world. Some mornings, when the cabin was quiet and the light slipped gently through the pine branches outside our window, I would wake before Elise and just watch her sleep. The lines of exhaustion were softer now, though they never fully disappeared. They were part of her, like the faint scars on her hands from years of work, like the way she still held her breath for half a second before answering the phone, bracing herself for bad news. I learned that loving her meant loving all of it. The sadness she carried, the strength it took to carry it, the hope she refused to give up, even when it hurt. We still went to the lake often, sometimes with Harley bounding ahead of us, sometimes just the two of us walking in comfortable silence. There were days Elise talked about work, about patients who reminded her why she chose this path despite everything. Other days she didn't say a word, and I didn't push. I'd learned that being present mattered more than fixing anything. That was something Mrs. Chen had taught me too, in her own quiet, stubborn way. On the anniversary of her death, Elise and I visited her grave together. We brought dumplings from the little shop downtown, the kind she loved, and left them there like an offering. Elise laughed softly through her tears and said Mrs. Chen would scold us for wasting good food. I told her Mrs. Chen would also be smug about how right she'd been. Standing there, hand in hand, I realized how close I'd come to missing all of this, how easy it would have been to walk out of that coffee shop, to retreat back into the safety of loneliness. Fear had almost won. Instead, here I was, living a life that still scared me sometimes, but in a way that felt honest. The grief never vanished. It simply learned how to coexist with joy. Sarah's memory still lived with me, not as a weight dragging me under, but as a quiet presence that reminded me how deeply I was capable of loving. Elise understood that in a way no one else ever could. She never competed with my past. She honored it. And in doing so, she gave me permission to honor myself. Sometimes, late at night, when the world was still and the cabin creaked softly around us, Elise would trace patterns on my chest and ask, "Do you ever think about how close we came to never meeting?" I always answered the same way. I try not to. It scares me too much. Because the truth was, everything meaningful in my life now had grown from a moment I almost rejected. A joke date, a meddling neighbor, a dying woman's last act of love. Mrs. Chen had seen something in me long before. I could see it myself. She'd known that hiding wasn't the same as healing, that safety wasn't the same as living, and that sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is not comfort but courage. On quiet mornings, when Elise and I sit on the porch with coffee warming our hands and Harley sprawled between us, I think about how love rarely arrives the way you expect it to. It doesn't ask politely. It doesn't wait until you feel ready. It crashes into your life disguised as inconvenience, as risk, as fear. And you either shut the door or you let it change you. I'm grateful every day that Mrs. Chen didn't give me the chance to say no, because love was worth the risk, always, especially when it scared me. So wherever you're watching this from, maybe sitting alone with a cup of coffee or winding down after a long day, I want to ask you something. Have you ever had someone in your life who saw what you needed before you did? Someone who pushed you toward a life you were too afraid to choose for yourself? If you have, hold on to that memory. If you haven't, maybe this is your sign that it's still possible. Drop a comment and share your story. And if this meant something to you, if it reminded you that love doesn't end just because it hurts, then subscribe and turn on notifications, because everyone deserves stories that remind them living is always worth the risk.